Hi everyone, Aleka Thorvalson here. I am going to talk to you today about a subject that's big. I get asked about it all the time, and it is self-love. What does it mean? How do we get it? I think it's one of those metaphysical buzzwords. It's just like those big concepts, right? We hear about forgiveness, uncertainty, surrender, purpose, passion, karma. We hear these, oh, you just need that, or you need to go get that, or you just need to forgive. You need to just let go. You need to just surrender. You need to just accept. What does that all mean? How do we actually do it? And the reason why I feel passionately about that is because I've been on my own quest of understanding that. At a young age, and when I started my own therapy, I had one of 3 or 4 different therapists would tell me, you just need to forgive. And I was like, yeah, that would be great. Somebody tell me how to do that. So that got me on my first quest of understanding what it means to forgive. And I spent about 2 years reading everything I could on forgiveness, talking to anyone I could, taking any kind of classes and seminars on forgiveness. And it helped me really understand what forgiveness means. So I do that with these other concepts as well. And maybe I'll do one of these on forgiveness. That would be a good one, right? But today we're going to talk about self-love because it's one of those things you hear about. Right? You hear, oh, you just need to love yourself. You need to love yourself before you can love anybody else. And while that's true, we know that's true. How do we do it? How do you love yourself? So that's what we're going to be talking about today, because it's huge. It's a big one. If you have topics that you want me to talk about, you can find me on Facebook. You can find me under my name. You can find me on my website, alekasky.com, ALEKASKY.com. You can contact me and you can say, hey, I want to know more about this, or I have questions about that. I have a whole list of topics that I'll get to eventually here, but this is one I wanted to start with since it kept coming up these last few weeks. I think it's a big one. Okay. First thing I want to say about it, many of us grow up with misinformation and misconceptions about what love looks like because the people that taught us about love don't understand it either, right? So we're sort of the blind leading the blind to some extent. And even because there's lots of people that come from well-meaning and self-adjusted and amazing parents or caregivers. That's true. Even still, our culture isn't very good at teaching us about what real love means. I mean, you think about our media, you think about what we see in books. I was raised on Disney movies, right? So the prince that's coming is going to live happily ever after, and all will be well. I'll be totally happy, right? We all have that. And guess what? Our princes have issues because we all have issues. And it's not about living happily ever after. It's about learning about ourselves and growing and evolving and transforming in relationships. So I think it's super important to remember that when we talk about loving ourselves, we don't quite know what it means anyway, right? So very, very important to recognize. Now, I will one of these days do a whole talk on relationships. That would be good. But if you're interested in learning more about that piece, we're going to focus on the self today. But if you're interested on the relationship piece, on my website, there's a page called the Holistic Health Hour. And that is a podcast that I've done that has tons of content on there. I'm not doing podcasts anymore because this is more fun. I think it's a way that you can see me and we can sort of connect this way. So, but if you want to know about that, feel free to go listen to it. It's free, but it's 4 hours of content on relationships and what it's about and what we're supposed to learn from them. That was another few years of study work to figure out what is this thing, relationships. Anyway, so back to self-love. Yeah, I don't think we get very good messages about it. We sort of grow up, or many of us, I should say, have this concept of who am I? You know, who am I really? And we're kind of waiting for that, what I call a reflected sense of self, for someone to show up that reflects our light and is able to stay there and then never waver, you know, but that's not necessarily helpful. We kind of grow up looking for someone to complete us. Famous Jerry Maguire, right? You complete me. We're all waiting for that. But the truth is nobody can, because it's not about anybody completing us. It's about us completing us. So that's an important piece. We have all kinds of patterns that we bring to this concept of love and what it looks like. For some of us, it looks like codependency or martyrism. For some, it looks like enabling. For some, it looks like setting up strong boundaries where we don't let anybody in. I mean, we're all a little confused, right? But when it comes to self-love, I think there's a few things that we can practice that just helps us in the relationship department. Because when we can connect to our truth and who we are, and we have that grounded sense of self, what I mean by that is we don't have that part of us that's empty or looking for something to fill it. It's already full. That changes our whole perspective of who we attract and who we allow into our space. So self-love is super important. I mean, there is that truth that you can't really love anyone else until you love yourself. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of one of those metaphysical buzz phrases, I should say. The truth is, I don't think you can love anybody well until you learn how to love yourself well, right? Okay, so what can we say about that? One thing I do want to point out here, it's easy to say that to love yourself means you should go get a massage every day, or get your nails done, or get, you know, any kind of self-care habits, go to the gym and do all these things. And that's wonderful. I mean, those are great things to do. But if we're not still grounded in our sense of self, that no matter what we do to try to change the outside, we don't actually do anything. And most of the time, people with issues around self-love have an issue with receiving. So even if we do all these great things, if we're not really grounded in who we are, then we don't actually take it in. Think about that in relationship to a relationship. So say that you're having a real issue, a fundamental issue within your relationship. Somebody can bring you flowers and you know, buy you chocolate and get you a massage and do all the things that we can do to try to piece that together. But if you're not communicating, if your intimacy is off, if there's something that's going on that you're not talking about, no matter what you do on the outside, it won't really change the foundation. So that's important to recognize, that those things are great to do as a way of self-nurturing, but first we actually have to get to what the problem is. And then those things feel really good. So first thing I tell anybody that's asking me about how do I love myself? What does that look like? I'll say, okay, we have to challenge and change that inner critic. It is very interesting to look at the habitual stories that we tell ourselves. Some interesting statistics about that. There, about 85% of what we say to ourselves today is what we have told ourselves yesterday. So we're saying the same thing. And of that large percentage, at least 70 to 75% is negative in nature. That's huge. No wonder we're not having so much fun and loving ourselves. So if we want to change the way we see ourselves and the way we love and honor ourselves, we have got to challenge and change the way we speak to one another. And I think that's very important. Would you stay in a relationship with someone else that talked to you the way that you talk to you? Hopefully no, right? Hopefully the answer is no, that you wouldn't allow that. because it's not healthy. And so often we get into these habits of saying these things to ourselves and talking to ourselves in ways that are not loving, that are not honoring. And quite frankly, they're not even true, which is even more disturbing. So we need to challenge and change that voice. And the good news is that voice gets there by repetition. We create those neural pathways in our mind, and then they just sort of happen on autopilot. It's like the elevator music in our head that is always there, but we don't notice it after a while. So it gets there, but the good news is we can change it. We can change it by being aware of it. That's number one. And if you want to blow your mind, listen to yourself for 24 hours. Just see what it is that you're telling yourself. And there's a lot of work that we can do around that. That would be a whole separate hour on how to change and what to do with the inner critic. Again, on that Holistic Health Hour on my website, there is a whole hour, if not more, dedicated to the inner critic and how to shift and change that. What we're really trying to do is get it to be more true. We don't want to, sort of hustle or edit that part of us that's like, oh, I'm just going to make this, negative thought look pretty, but I don't really believe it. It's not that. It's not trying to manipulate our thinking to get us to see it a different way. It's about really challenging it and asking what's more true. What's really true? Perhaps your inner critic tells you you're not very smart. It says, God, you're so dumb. You always say the dumbest things, because that's how our inner critic talks. I mean, it does. It's not nice. And what's true about that? What's true is that you're not stupid. You say lots of very, very intelligent things. There are times when we aren't as conscious with our words, but 9 times out of 10, you're actually very intelligent. And so there's really a way to ask yourself, what's really true about that? Of course, there's shadow work we can do with that. Who said it? Where'd that come from? All that good stuff. You can go deep with that. And if you really want to challenge and change the inner critic to turn it down, to hear the voice of the inner advocate, you will want to do that work. But for now, as we're just sort of talking about it, doing that work of changing that voice, because who wants to hang out with ourselves if that's what we're telling ourselves? It's not a very pleasant place. Our bodies react to that physically, our physiological, ways in which our body works changes in how we say what we say. Our cells listen and pay attention. What we tell ourselves really matters on a spiritual level, on a psychological level, on a physical and physiological level. So just recognize how deep that is for you. And loving the self means that we're not going to say anything to ourselves that we wouldn't say to someone that we cared and loved. That's important. So you can see what a big, piece that is. So shifting that inner dialogue, shifting and challenging that inner critic. That's number one. Another piece that I find really, really, really important is boundary setting. Boundaries, so important. It's the place that we say, you are here and I am here. It's a space in which we etch out our identity and who we are and say, this is me. This is what I value. This is what I stand for. This is who I am. If someone says, who are you? And we answer, who do you want me to be? That's a problem, right? Because we don't have boundaries. So boundaries are very important. How do we know where to set boundaries? This is a big topic. Boundaries are another one of those things that we don't get conditioned very well with. We either grew up with too many boundaries or not enough boundaries, and our culture is not very good at teaching us boundaries. So it's very important to understand how boundaries work in your own life. But essentially, boundaries are saying no to something and saying yes to yourself at the same time. They're a way in which you create sacredness about who you are. If you think of that in terms of relationships, most good relationships have boundaries. Some of those boundaries are, we're just exclusive. We're not doing this with anybody else. That's an important boundary to have. And there's a sense of sacredness to that space that sets up a space of trust, that sets up a space of intimacy that you wouldn't find anywhere else. And if those boundaries are violated, we lose some of that, and it can take some time to get that stuff back. The same thing happens in your inner world with yourself. Boundaries create a sense of intimacy, a sense of authenticity, a sense of divinity within you. They're saying, this is who I am, and that's awesome. So important to remember about boundaries is anger. Anger is an emotion that allows us to know when we should set boundaries. It says someone has either violated a boundary or is going to soon, or we need to set one. It's like our inner warrior goddess, our inner warrior coming up saying, no, that's not okay with me. And it can come from a place of safety. Certainly, we have a lot of that. Someone is coming into your space in a way that doesn't feel good to you. No, but from a more pseudo spiritual, psychological place, we want to be able to say no because we're coming from a place of self-love. Addiction is one of those places that we practice with boundaries. It's pretty clear. When we say no to an addict, what we're saying is, I love you too much to enable you in this unhealthy behavior, and I love me too much to allow me to take part in it. Now, whether we have the addict out there with somebody in the real world, or we're working with our own inner addict, and we all have these archetypes, we all have these parts of us. Sometimes they're more activated than others. But we can all fall into these places where we need boundaries with ourselves. So boundaries are so important to have with other people as a way of claiming our self-love. That can be very validating in that way. And they're also very important with ourselves as a way to validate and claim self-love within ourselves. A lot of times I see this with food with people, with relationships with people, with other addictions with people, where we're saying, what is the most loving thing I can do right now for me? And sometimes it is not eating the entire thing of ice cream, especially if we have eating issues. It is, you know what? I'm going to take a day off. I need to stop working. And that goes against a part of us that wants to continue, right? Maybe the inner enforcer is showing up, and we need to say, no, I need a break. And sometimes it's about saying no to ourselves when our child is showing up, or our addict, or whoever, whatever part is showing up. So it's very important to have some awareness here about what part of us is showing up, and what is the most loving thing we can do. Oftentimes we think of love as this very squishy and nurturing and rainbows and butterflies and all is one. Fairy tales, you complete me. We're going to live happily ever after. We think of love that way, and sometimes it is. It can be amazingly nurturing and loving and soft and squishy. But love is not always that way. Love is fierce. Love is definitive. Love is setting boundaries, right? It's being assertive and saying no. Because when we say no to something that isn't serving us, it's a nod. It's an act of self-love for us. So boundaries, very, very, very important. Again, we can do a whole sort of talk on boundaries, because it's important to remember, what part is coming up. It's important to remember to set from a place of I, so we're not trying to manage somebody else's behavior, like you need to stop doing that so I feel better. That's not necessarily it. It's to be able to say, this is what I need in this moment. This is what's coming up for me. And it involves assertion. And the two parts to assertion, which you've all heard me say, is number one, speaking your truth from a grounded sense of self, and two, letting go of the other person's need to like it. Because with boundaries, sometimes, often, we get pushback. We get somebody saying, well, I wasn't ready for that boundary. I don't know how I feel about you setting that boundary. And I have a boundary of my own now, or I have emotion of my own that's coming up. So inherent in boundaries, number one, it's an act of self-love. Number two, it's a practice of resiliency. It's a practice of being able to say, you know what, I'm not responsible for your feelings. I can honor them. I can understand them. I can stand here and I can be in it as long as it's healthy expression of those feelings. But I don't need to be responsible for those in the way in which I would if I didn't have boundaries. So it's a way we can practice resiliency. It's a way we can practice being really grounded and finding those parts of ourselves that we're not worried about rejection. In other words, if someone rejects us, we don't implode. We don't lose our focus. We still recognize who we are. And that's important. Okay, so boundaries, super important to self-care and self-love, finding that sense of love. The other piece that's so important is allowing yourself to have your feelings. Very, very important. You can imagine, and maybe some of you experienced this growing up, that you would bring sadness to the table. You would be sad. And maybe the people around you didn't know what to do with that. So oftentimes when people don't understand what to do with certain feelings, they try to get you either A, to feel better. So let's go shopping. Let's have some cake. You don't need to be sad, right? You don't need to be sad. Or they deny it. You're not sad. You shouldn't be sad about something like that. Or they shame you. Why are you sad? That's stupid. So there's an element there that we can learn how to not have our feelings. So we shame ourselves. We might reward ourselves so we don't feel sad. But having feelings is actually a really important place to find a sense of self-love. It's about self-acceptance. It's about honoring where we are and allowing ourselves to be there. Plus, feelings are super, super helpful to understand how we should go through our lives. If we don't have our feelings, we're working with half our compass. Our feelings give us such important wisdom about why we're here and what we're doing, passion, purpose, inspiration, love. You want to navigate love, you're going to have to feel your way through it and use the light of those feelings and not get stuck in the shadow. So having feelings is super important to embracing self-love. It's about allowing ourselves to be where we are. It's also about having boundaries around those feelings, everything we've talked about here, that if it's an old feeling, it's a feeling that we've had, perhaps we're feeling that our insecurity button just got triggered. Being able to say to ourselves, I hear that that's where you're coming from with that. That's an old story. What really happened here, right? Being able to parent ourselves, act of self-love. So allowing ourselves to have feelings, allowing ourselves to see our shadow. There's a great terminology that I've used before, being flawsome, being flawed and awesome. We don't have to deny who we are. We can admit that we're not perfect, and that's perfect. It's absolutely necessary for developing a strong sense of self-love to recognize that it's okay not to be perfect, and to recognize our shadow, to own it, to explore it, to not try to deny it or pretend like it's not there. So doing projection and integration work can be so incredibly helpful for owning parts of ourselves that we may not be conscious of completely. So it's about being authentic. It's about being authentic with our feelings. We're not denying or numbing them or using them in old ways or allowing them to overtake us in past patterns that aren't necessarily helpful. We're allowing ourselves to be who we are. We're being authentic. And that doesn't mean that we can walk around going, yeah, I'm imperfect, so that's why I do that. I'm a flake. That's not healthy either. It's to be able to say, hey, I have these flaws and I'm working on them, but I don't need to be perfect in that. And I'm going to share them with you, and I'm going to understand where I'm coming from, and I'm not going to hide or edit who I am. And it's not about saying, this is who I am, deal with it. That's not healthy either. Those are counter-dependent boundaries. Okay, so you're getting the feel of where I'm going with this. It's quite a lot more than just getting a massage every week, right? There's a real practice to learning how to love and accept yourself. Intuition, that's another big one. Kind of goes with authenticity. It goes with trusting your your feelings. Feelings and intuition go hand in hand. That's important. So allowing yourself to be conscious of your intuition, balancing that with your logical mind, very, very important to allowing ourselves to be who we fully are. I think we live in a logical culture. We live in a culture that tends to ask you, what do you think about that? Not, how do you feel about that? What feels right to you about that? And I think that we would do ourselves a service as far as honoring who we are if we allow ourselves the ability to trust and listen to our intuitive guidance, because it's there, it's huge. We'll do another video on that. Again, on my Holistic Health Hour, there is lots of content on intuition since I use it so much in my own work. So you can go check that out if you want. I will have an intuition class coming up too. I believe I'm going to be doing it virtually as well. I have in-person stuff going all the time, but I've had more of you ask me for virtual stuff. So I think I'll be doing that. So honoring our intuition, kind of getting in touch with our heart. Who am I? What does it say? It's so easy to invalidate our intuition with logic. I should move. I really feel that this job isn't for me. I don't know exactly what is for me, but I know this isn't. There's a part of us that we hear, we say it, it's so loud, but then we say stuff like, oh, you're never going to make any money at that. Or, no, that's not logical. That'll take too long. Or, nobody's ever going to buy that book or that painting. You know, bullshit. Yeah. Listen to that intuition. It's there for a reason. It's telling you something. So important piece there. Lastly, I want to say that embodying, embracing self-love is about allowing ourselves to receive and about allowing ourselves to have fun. It's so amazing to me that when I talk to clients, how much that can actually be a challenge. I know from my own story, that was a big one. I really didn't understand what having fun was, mostly because of just my upbringing and the way that the experiences that I had. I sort of was in a caretaker role from a very early age, more in that I was sort of initiated into the tribe of adulthood a little too young, just having to put out a lot of fires and juggle a lot of balls for the addicts and people around me. So having fun was a new concept. I remember early on in my therapy, one of my therapists, great therapist, loved her, she said, so what do you do for fun? And I remember having this moment going, I clean my house. I like to organize, and she sort of laughed and said, well, I think I know where we need to start. It's a great prescription to give to you. Go have fun. But it's not easy. And I understand that. It's another one of those, well, just go have fun. How do I do that if it feels unsafe, unfamiliar? I don't even know where to start, right? And I always talk about that in relation to our sort of comfort zone. Here's our comfort zone. And many of us, if we've lived a life of any kind of intensity, have a comfort zone, like the lower part of it, like how much we can stand, how resilient we are, is pretty deep, right? Well, like, yeah, I've been there. I can hold space for you. I can do that. But then the upper limits, the joy, the abundance, that threshold is low. So then the moment we take a step out of it, like, oh, I'm going to have fun, what happens if it's unconscious is it sabotages us right back to what we know. So there's a great teacher named Mario Martinez. I heard this from him first, but other people have said it, that says you have to do as much work on your joy as you do on your pain. I found that so fascinating because it's true. We have to work at having fun. And there is another show on I've done a lot of shows. There's another podcast on my website that talks about this and what it means to really expand your field of abundance and embrace joy. But the first part of that is to do things that are fun. And if you don't know what those are, it's okay. I get it. Where do you feel called? Do you like music? Start there. Do you like to dance? Start there. Do you like art? Try that. Do you like boating? Do you like to walk on the beach? What do you enjoy? Just start there. And the way that this works is you'll get the little stepping stones to where you need to go next. And then you can certainly listen to that podcast I did on abundance and joy to be able to say, okay, how do I, make that threshold higher so I don't fall into self-sabotage? Because it's so easy for us to do that. And I can talk more about that on another video if we want to go in that direction. So remember, love is not a destination, it's a journey. It's where we are trying to get to. And the only way we can get more of it in our own life is if we do the works to sort of unlock or unblock the blocks that we have created. Rumi was an amazing poet and has a lot to say on, it's about removing the blocks to love. We don't need to get more of it. We need to let go of all those blocks that we have created in our lives against it. So I hope this gives you some idea about how to start your own self-love practice and how to really fall in love with you. All right, so find me on my website, alekasky.com. Love any kind of feedback, questions, video ideas, that kind of thing. Check out all the classes I have going on all the time. As I said, I do a lot of stuff that's online these days. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Until the next time, I'll see you.